Okay,
All
so
right.
no more doxing names.
Alrighty.
Right, so welcome to welcome to the Teach and Learn podcast. Today our topic is censorship and responsible platforming in an extremely polarized world. And we have a guest called G. G, do you want to talk a bit about yourself while I set up the stream?
I am BDD. I've come to because I've been invited to participate in this lively discussion, or what I hope to be a lively
Right, I guess our guest is not too
discussion.
big
So,
on words.
do you guys hear me now?
Yes, I'm just trying to find the link so I can send it to Learn to make sure everything is good. It just
Okay.
not.
I mean, I guess I'll repeat. Name is King BDD. I am simply here to participate in what I hope is a very lively discussion about a topic that I'm actually pretty interested in, given the fact that I kind of use Twitter, or at least I used to. I thoroughly enjoy just looking at tweets. So
Oh,
this
but
would be pretty fun.
you're not the kind of person that actually makes tweets, right?
I don't make tweets, but I'm a lurker. I'm a
Okay,
lurker.
fair enough. So yeah, Learn, could you just do a check to make sure the podcast is the live stream is working pretty well?
Yeah, did you share the link?
Yes, I shared it on Discord.
Okay. Yeah, I can see your Movember.
Yes.
Okay. All right. Well, thank you for the introductions, Teach. And thank you, King DDD Almighty, for joining this very mouthful topic, but hopefully we'll be able to like diagnose the core of what is meaningful to us from this title, and why is it even important to us. So the first thing that I'm going to ask our new guest, King DDD, is you mentioned that one of the reasons why this is interesting for you is because of your past experience on Twitter. So do you mind explaining a little bit more in details why is this an interesting conversation for you?
I think because I've been on both sides of experiencing Twitter as a complete cesspool, as well as a very helpful place to get information about uh, current events literally as they're happening. Um, and I wouldn't be surprised if most people's experience with similar platforms are similar to mine, which is you've seen the good and the bad, but you enjoy the fact that censorship has a place in those platforms, um, but appreciate also the nuances of how to be a good moderator and what to censor and what not to censor, and um, knowing that you'll never be able to fully please anyone. So I think I'm appreciative of the moderators since have had the experience of similar platforms becoming just absolute cesspools.
Hmm. Hmm. I see. Okay. Well, that's good. That's something I did not know. I did not know that that you advocate for both sides, as then you see, the positive, I guess, of the positive reasons for why censorship is needed, but you also see a risk of too much censorship, I guess. How about you, Teach? Could you explain to me why? I know that, if we refer back to the previous live, we were discussing how to make money with streams, and then the main question that got to our to that like piqued our interest, both of us, is, well, if all your revenue is on that platform and then you get banned all of a sudden or kicked for something controversial that you or maybe your guest have said, then you lose all what you've built in a matter of, I don't know how long it can take, but regardless,
It could be hours even.
wow. Okay. Well, so that was, I mean, as someone who's trying to learn how to build a successful stream, it was pretty shitty to hear that, and that's kind of what got my interest in this topic. How about you? Why are you so interested in that topic?
Well, I'm interested in that topic mainly because I think that I am someone who usually am very pro free speech, or at least, especially, I used to be extremely pro free speech, like the kind of yelling fire in a crowded theater should be protected kind of extreme. But my views significantly changed throughout the years, and while I still consider myself on the pro free speech side, I would say my ideal is now closer to what I would refer to as responsible speech. So,
Mm,
free speech is a very important tool, but it has to be used extremely responsibly. And not using it responsibly is the equivalent sometimes of yelling fire in a crowded theater.
Mm.
And
Uh, what's your definition of responsible?
well, a good small bar for it to be responsible is for it to not be misleading, right? If you
Mm,
have speech where someone consistently lies, and in that sense, it's already dangerously hitting the irresponsible area. If you're saying speech that's a call to action to violence, obviously very irresponsible. And then comes the gray area speech, where you're insinuating things which have very logical conclusions, but then you hide behind, I did not say that or mean that, right?
right. So speech that someone can infer what you meant by it, and maybe it leads to your point too, like a call to action to violence
Yes.
or spreads misinformation. So, I mean, my second question is because I'm trying to get informed about what your point of view is. So, if that's your definition of responsibility, what do you do when it comes to more nuanced topics? Where, so I won't take your first point, which is misinformation, because I think that's the easiest, quote unquote, easiest to actually spot.
mhm.
But things like calls to violence and or speech that may actually cause someone to infer something that you didn't explicitly say. Um, there's the topic of trolling, for example. Um, at what point does trolling become irresponsible free speech?
The best way I see it, and the problem with trolling, and in general, let's say communities who like to, well, be super ironic. Like, they have always existed in the internet, what I would call like ironic Nazis. Like these people who would like make Nazi jokes and all of that, but they really aren't, right? Like they don't ascribe to the ideology and they don't believe any of, well, what at least the Nazi party believes in.
So you're saying basically speech that could be
No,
considered as
well,
I forget the word.
I'm just bringing
Oh, go
up
ahead.
an example, right? And in the
Uh-huh.
case of these people, you can't really, like what ends up always happening is that their communities ends up being infiltrated by actual Nazis, right?
Okay.
Like people who say like jokes like, yeah, we should genocide everyone, and they say it jokingly, but then at some point you'll have like 10 or 20% of the community saying that stuff, like no jokes, no gaffes, they really believe it.
So I
And
guess, sorry, just to like clarify if I'm understanding correctly what you mean by responsibility here. So is a good definition, I guess, for responsibility here is like if the person, either the troller or the ironic Nazi guy, is he aware of the unintended consequences of the troll that he's going for, or the possible repercussions of what, even if his intentions are benign, um, there could be severe consequences, such as real Nazis joining in that community.
I would say usually they are not aware. Like, I don't think in most cases they know that or intend for that to happen.
So that's why they would be considered irresponsible because they did not take the time to be aware of what could be the consequences of their actions.
I guess, but it is hard, right? Like, I feel like holding, let's say, a community of random people on the internet to the same standard you would hold, let's say, like a public figure should be completely different, right? So actually,
Mm.
yeah, like to answer your question, G, um, I think no, they shouldn't be held to the same standard, and it's not the same thing if you have someone who's trolling online versus, let's say, a public figure talking. Like, I wouldn't even say you can be that irresponsible as, like, let's say, a shit poster with no followers. Now, if you're a shit poster with like 10,000 followers or 100,000 followers or a million followers, at some point you have to realize that maybe half of the people liking your stuff are like Nazis, and this is not a good thing.
Well, see, I, I, I I find part of that definition a little irky because what we're really talking about is like the age-old debate around satire, right? And that they're the people who it's intended for, and then the people who the satire is about. And unironically, a lot of the times that those two positions kind of swap, where the people who it's intended for don't get it, and the people who it's about take it seriously or think it's real. But then you introduce the concept of censorship, right?
Yeah,
Because then what do you do with satire? Because I don't know, like a satire piece posted in some Daily Bugle newspaper or something, um, something that's spread across the internet on a platform where it can be shared millions of times in barely under an hour. Um, it's not inconceivable to think that those two positions might swap. And so, what would you, as a person who's supposed to moderate between that, actually say or do? Because on one end, you could censor it because obviously half the people who are sharing this thing are taking it seriously.
yeah.
And on the flip side, the original poster maybe had no such intentions and was literally posting a piece of satire to mock the very people sharing it. But that is not how it's coming across, and that's not how it's being spread. So its original context is completely lost. Is that the original poster's fault, whether they had followers or not?
Well, it depends too of like willing to, but that's say because the problem is I was gonna say it depends on maybe if they how like how much disavowing are they making, right? But I think that is that too because like someone could like disavow something, but they're really just doing it to not get banned or to not get like the backlash,
Exactly. Yeah.
and also you're entering a very dangerous game where where you're basically starting like public shaming people or like saying, "Hey, apologize for your joke, bro," which is kind of messed up.
Right. Right. Hmm.
And just so you
So,
know, like I don't have any of the answers. I'm thinking about them like as we talk.
I think there's an interesting thing about people feeling targeted all the time through posts. Like I saw a post like the other day,
Yeah,
and it was through Twitter before Elon Musk took over. So right now it's just lost in the annals of history at this point. But
yeah,
there was a post where this woman was posted the fact that she and her husband were enjoying sitting down in their garden together in the backyard.
yeah.
And a ton of these comments were like, wow, super privileged. Wow, what it is to be super privileged and able to own a home. Like, how dare you be irresponsible and own a house in the middle of a city center that could have been public housing or some shit.
Okay,
So,
yeah.
so you get to this point where people feel and are offended, even if the post had fuck all to do with you. Now, take that example and then say somebody creates a piece of sort of kind of not really offense worthy content that had no intention behind it, and now you, again as a moderator, have to decide: is this banning level thing? Like what they said and how it was taken is, let's say, is terrible, right? Should you ban this person,
Well,
especially on a
yes and
platform like
no,
Twitch?
because like for example, like to me this is a much more, let's say, clear-cut case than what I was thinking about when you told me before. And the reason why I would consider this a much more clear-cut case is because in this very specific case, where is the harm being done? Someone being offended, I don't consider that harm, right? Someone
Mm.
developing like very, let's say, racist views because of your posts, obviously like to multiple, because like there's no single post that contains powers to make someone racist. Like
Why is that any less bad though? Because
I'll tell you why,
uh,
because if your content is not radicalizing anyone, right? If your content is provocative, even let's say it's like provocative would be the word, but it's speaking truth, and it's
uh,
not particularly, I would say, harmful, like in the sense like harmful here, to be clear. I'm talking always about like either misinformation that will lead to bad consequences, example, COVID misinformation, or information that would lead to violence towards like a certain group, right? Like such as dehumanizing information. And I'll take, let's say, the hot take. If your information is truthful, even if it might lead to messed up results, it should be allowed, as long as it is truthful.
truthful. Okay, that leaves a lot of room for interpretation still,
Yes,
right? Like,
if
for
you're
example,
yeah, go
the
ahead.
definition of radicalized, because radicalized is a very contextual word, and what I mean by that is, okay, let's say that post may not have the intention to radicalize, but ends up doing so anyways. Would you take it down?
Uh, Again, if it's not truthful, yes.
But let's say it's experiential. Like
What do you mean?
it has nothing to do with trying to make a truth claim. It just is talking about their experience.
Like, let's say, for
And
example, I had bad experience with X amount of race people, right? That kind of what you're getting to?
sure, it could be that. It could fall into that category. Yeah.
For that specific scenario, I would probably be like it should say. If you
Hmm.
say, right, if you say, hey, I had a bad experience with this member of X community, again, it's okay. I mean, yeah, sure, it might reinforce the biases of someone who's already racist,
Hmm.
but at the end of the day, it's like the whole like
Yeah, but
this is
collectively, but then you gotta understand that this doesn't understand this does that type of posting doesn't exist in a vacuum. It's a
oh
collective,
I hundred
right? So,
percent
so if
no,
you have like a
but
hundred of those, the first
that
one might not radicalize you, but the 99th, it's probably gonna do something to you.
So I
yes,
think
but
honestly,
that's where
you,
unfortunate.
you,
Go ahead. Sorry, Lorraine. Go ahead.
no, I think just the fact that you guys are now discussing the gray areas, it outlines perfectly what is the complexity of today's moderator, and the job is not easy and is not going to get any easier. And the fact that the argument that you guys are having here is not an argument that should necessarily have or would have a definite answer. We could definitely be talking here for hours, and we're gonna find gray areas where there could be pros and cons, and that just in my understanding of this so far is just outlining the complexity of the moderator at this stage, and what can we do to kind of like find guidelines when it comes to this complexity, to not have this kind of like gray area thing. I mean, we're definitely going to have a gray area no matter what, but what is it? What kind of solutions can we come up with such that this becomes an easier job? Let's say that's our goal, right? Let's say a noble goal would be how to make the life of a moderator easy, because I guess that goal would solve the problem indirectly as well. And I think defining what are we trying to avoid is a good place to start. For example, Teach, you mentioned like harm being done, and that per se, like King Didi did mention that, that's also ambiguous a bit. Why is certain things that that could be harmful in the eyes of someone that got offended, not harmful in your perspective. So are we saying that harm should not be dependent on any particular perspective? Should it possibly be defined clearly what we mean by harm?
I think so, right? Because like someone being offended, I wouldn't consider that harm. Now, a single post on it in itself, I wouldn't consider that harm either. It is true that a collective of posts could lead to problems, kind of like what G said. But
Hmm.
at the same time, this is the price of free speech, right? Like, if you want, like, if like people could counter that, people could show statistics. At some point, you are able to counter that misinformation, right? What's more dangerous is not single incidents because, like, in any proper debate, usually your opponent will tell you, you know what, I don't give a crap about your anecdotal experience, right? Give me data, give me statistics. And if the other person gives you, like, starts like airing bullshit statistics like, oh, 90% of race X commit 10,000% of the crimes, or like some crap like that, then in that case, this I find that this is causing way more real harm to the world.
So then one of the harm that you're describing, let's say I'm creating a document where I'm outlining what we consider harm. One of the things is spreading misinformation because it creates a misinformed society.
It creates a misinformed society where it could justify also a lot of terrible actions. And I would say they would be considered justified. Like let's say for example, right? For real, like race X actually commits 90% of like all the crime in the thing, right? In
Mhm.
someone's like if that was true, and then some people come up with, let's say, more racially targeted measures, and there's literally no other explanation, right? Like let's say for example, that traces like the wealthiest people in the world, they have like the best things in the world. It's kind of like, obviously hypotheticals that trace X doesn't exist, but that could justify, like, let's say, more messed up views towards them, right?
Yes.
And that's what makes it so messed up, because in my beliefs and my viewpoints, there is no such a thing as an inherently superior race or like an inherently inferior race. Like those don't exist, right? And I don't see any data that proves it either.
Hmm.
And I think that's why people are more fascistic, people that, let's say, have what I would consider pretty abhorrent viewpoints, they would be more willing. Like they don't have the evidence on their side, so they are willing to lie for it. Because and in that case, they can create a world where they're right, and that world is rife with misinformation.
Yeah, but a moderator, listening to someone giving facts about a certain race, right? He
Yeah,
he's gonna fact check fact
yeah,
check those stats, those facts, and if ever the sources are valid sources, then it should be a clear cut in this case, unless King Didi or you have something to like a point to that, but it should be a clear case to be like, okay, is this harmful? Let's say you're
It's
going through
not.
the harm, sheet and you're going through the checklist and you're saying, is this harmful based on the misinformation it's spreading? Yes or no?
It
Uh,
isn't. It isn't as clear cut because depends on the piece of information. Again, there are plenty of gray areas, especially if we're saying that this information is based on a statistic. There are a lot of different ways in context to place a statistic in which can either support or go against your point of view, right? Or whatever point of view you
yeah,
may hold. Like you could say, and
yeah.
you could even interpret statistics in a very it's eh, iffy way that allows your viewers to just infer something, right? And it's hard to say, is this misinformation? Is the interpretation bad? Is the statistic bad? Like what we're saying is the more clear cut is if you just straight up pull the statistic out of your ass. Like that's easy to verify. You know what I mean?
Yeah.
But on the other point, what if the statistic isn't pulled out of your ass, but the interpretation is? And that's the
Then,
difficulty. It's the
well,
fact that we have to interpret, and then that interpretation gets put under the guise of free speech, but could still have a lot of evidence pointing against
yeah,
it, and yet still radicalize people and actually cause harm.
yeah.
You
But
know what I mean?
at that
But
stage, it's the job of well, let's call it political opposition to
mm,
challenge you, not the platform. Because
that
if
I
you
disagree with that.
yeah, well, we can get. Why do you disagree?
Mm. I disagree with that because it's impossible to remove the platform or it's either impossible or irresponsible to remove the platform completely from the equation of it's not their problem to deal with the misinformation, or more in particular, it's not their problem in my opinion to deal with the existence of the misinformation. It's their responsibility to deal with its spread, and those are two different, very different things, right? Um, the existence of anti-vaxxers is not a problem. The spread of anti-vaccination messages could be a problem. And if I'm the platform, I can't just say, "Hey, let the politicians who and the doctors who are supposed to be, popular enough to combat this misinformation, deal with it, and me, the platform moderator, not have to deal with it." That's bullshit because, well, they're not popular enough to, unironically, they're not popular enough with the people to actually combat it in a way that would be responsible and allows people to see the different points of views and reasonings and all that. Simply put, not always possible. In fact, most of the time it's not. When something like it's hard to stop that wildfire kind of thing, unless you have the platform moderator who has all the ammunition necessary to halt it in its tracks, or at least stop its spread. And so you can't just pull them out and say it's the responsibility of the politician. Like it isn't at that point because the politician doesn't hold enough power
Yes,
in
but
that
the
realm to
problem
do anything
is
about it.
here you're gonna be very quickly and dangerously reaching the what I call echo chambers. Because it's not I'm not saying that the platform doesn't have a responsibility. I'm saying that the platform can deal with the situation responsibly.
Can't or can
Cannot. Because
cannot. Okay.
if they do deal with it the way you're saying it, we enter very dangerously in the territory of who watches the watchman, right? At what point do you decide who decides whose interpretation of the data is correct, right? I mean, take it from a other viewpoint. Imagine if Twitter was all, which might not be that far off, right? I don't think Musk is an anti-vaxxer, but imagine if Twitter is owned by an anti-vaxxer, and then they decide that you know what, any study, any statistics that is interpreted to support vaccines, that's it's just the interpretation of the study.
Mhm.
What happens then?
Uh, well, let me ask you a counter question because and it's not really a question, but really something that happened literally this week,
Yeah,
which was Elon Musk reinstating Trump's
yeah,
Twitter account, right?
yeah,
And the reason he did this isn't, now one can argue about the efficiency of the method of just taking a Twitter poll. I think that's pretty stupid,
yeah.
especially if you could just be use bots to vote. But putting that aside, let's say the majority of the population actually vote to reinstate um, an account on this platform that we know spreads misinformation like wildfire every other day, like for a fact.
Yeah.
But the majority of the population decides to go with it anyways.
Okay.
Do you, as a moderator, decide to ban that account because of misinformation, or and say that you have to deal with it? It falls under the realm of your responsibility, or do you say, since the people in your platform are deciding to support this specific type of free speech, that I am not supposed to do anything about it because it would be irresponsible of me towards the platform? And
Uh, well, I mean, I don't support you reinstating or banning people based on polls.
mm,
And I mean, you kind of stated the reason yourself, right? Like, I don't even have to restate it. But like for me, it's also a matter of consistency, right? Right?
consistency.
Like you can't just like like you can't have rules that only apply to a certain like piece of your population. You know,
You have an example?
like you can't say misinformation is bad unless half the people vote for it or against it.
Oh, okay. I see what you mean. Yeah.
That's what I mean. Like that's more the fundamental reason where I'm against it, because it makes your platform seem super arbitrary, which is kind of how Twitter feels right now, right?
Mm-hmm. Okay. Fair enough.
I think that it's um it's it's definitely complicated for a moderator
Yeah,
to come and have the burden of determining what is considered misinformation, if he needs to consider it to that degree, because now we're asking the moderator to become an expert in that particular field, because he needs to determine which evidence
yeah,
is based on, which evidence is more accurate uh, than the other, and the intention of the content provider, or whoever is delivering the content, is not necessarily to mislead the viewers. It could be that these are his genuine findings on a particular topic. Yet, like kind of like the vaccine topic is a good one. Like a genuine anti-vaxxer could say, "Listen, this is what I found. This is scientific evidence that I found. These are the studies I refer." As long as there's transparency involved as how he got to the information and how he got to the conclusions regarding this information, why is the moderator in control? Isn't he? Is it? This is my question actually, and
yeah.
whoever wants to can answer it. Isn't that infringing on the free speech of the one who's delivering the content at this point? If,
Well, of course it is, right? That's kind of why I said I moved from like a free speech absolutist to responsible speech, right? Like it's definitely 100% infringing on the free speech. That I don't think me or G would argue against that.
Mhm.
No, I agree with that.
But the thing is because it's causing harm in the world. That's the reason why, right? Because if that person is bringing up true stuff, by the way, like I'll say, you know what, kudos to them. It's just most of these people are bringing untrue stuff, right? Or things that have already been debunked, right? Like if you're referring to a study in the 50s that received 5 debunkings and is known to no longer be a study that anyone uses, that kind of falls under it, right? As to so yeah, like I know there's a big burden on moderators, but also at the same time, if a post has like 1 or 2 views, like okay, so like I would moderate that not out of like moralistic principle, but out of kind of like our stream right now. I think we have no viewers whatsoever. So even if we start saying like the craziest shit, which we wouldn't because we're responsible, like if you're saying something into the void, then it really doesn't matter. But if you have something that has like 10 or 20,000 views or 100,000 views, and it's just complete like bullshit and misinformation, then no. Like here, you have to moderate it. You have to have a moderator that's capable of researching it. And on the other hand, the person should be protected from like willy-nilly moderators who are gonna ban you because they don't like what you said. The burden of proof is on the moderator to make sure that whatever is being said is a lie.
Okay. I wonder what happens then, to your point of view, if you have two opposing sides. Because again, the topic of this episode, I think, is like in polarized worlds, right?
Yeah,
Where I think we've been trying to find like the nuances or the gotcha areas. But what happens when it's clearly not a gotcha, and that there are two sides who have clearly extremely opposing views, and they both may or may not have a point in certain points of views, but anything that they post is going to cause some form of radicalization, or at the very least, definitely people are going to get offended, but um, those same people who are offended may actually very much choose to like choose violence.
yeah,
I do think of actual world issues like I will say like Israel Palestine is
Mm.
a very very touchy issue
Yes.
because at some point you could be on either side and be like, oh, I see your point, and then if ever you posted any shit that even infers, oh, I see your point, the other side is going to be like, oh, so you're an anti-Semite, or oh, you don't support Palestine. You know what I mean? So
Yeah. Well, that's
it's
kind of why you don't care about the other side. That's kind of why, like I'm always
no, but you
saying,
as a moderator though,
you
not
don't.
you as a poster.
Yeah, yeah. You as a moderator, you don't care about you care about the facts, right? If one person says, "Hey," let's obviously I'm coming up with this number. If someone says, "Hey, there's like 10,000 Palestinians that died last year due to Israel," and that's fact checked, that's correct, fine. You leave it, no matter how much everyone does. Even if you say some shit like, you know what, 70% of the Israeli government is, or like 30% is like Orthodox Jews, and they're the ones pushing for it. If it is true, you leave it, right?
Hmm?
And if Israel start posting about how, like, let's say, oh, like Hamas is sending all these weapons and sowing all these targets, they do 10,000 things, and you could say even like, oh, the Arab members of the Israeli parliament have a lot of, let's say, Hamas sympathizers in them, right? If it's true, and there's like articles about, let's say, Arab members meeting like Hamas people and all of that, you leave it. You don't care who it offends, because if you go with the bar, like if your bar it's gonna offend someone, or it's gonna do something like that.
No, the bar isn't necessarily offending. I said at least, at the very least, you know it's going to happen. But I said at the average, though. So I'll rephrase it. On average, it would radicalize someone who's already close to that other side. For example, um,
Yes.
someone who is not Palestinian. Let's just say. I'll give this example because it may have happened, and I've seen close enough cases where it kind of has happened where someone who is not Palestinian, not Israeli, like at all, um, but starts listening in on a lot of these viewpoints and a lot of these posts on specific platforms, and then sees that post, for example, a very truthful post, but in a very extremely polarizing topic,
Yeah.
and they decide, you know what, yo, fuck Israel. And they
Yeah.
radicalize, but not
Yeah.
radicalize to the point of like just saying fuck Israel, but actually starts to take action on it. And you start seeing this trend
Yeah.
of people doing so. At that point,
Yeah.
when you know even a truthful post will radicalize people, do
Then
you
let out my answer will be, let it radicalize people. Maybe if the truth is radicalizing, that might be a good thing. Like that's the best way to say it. Like example, if people see like posts
what if
about
an
the one,
opinion what if an opinion does?
if the
Like what if
opinion
it's not
isn't
what if
truth,
it's not a number, but it's an opinion that's based on something truthy? Like I'm a developer, so I'm gonna kind of drag in JavaScript
okay.
into this. It's
Uh,
more of a it's not outright true,
can
but it's not something that's not necessarily false. It's an
it
interpretative truth. Let's put it that way.
well interpret? I would say interpreted. It's gray, but if it's true, like if it's true, then you leave it, right? At least I'll bite that bullet, right?
Hmm.
If you're having
So,
an opinion based on a truth, right?
mhm,
And that
mhm,
opinion is reasonable
yeah.
not in the sense it's all extreme, but it's like a reasonable extrapolation from set truths, right?
All right. Example. Touchy example. Israel killed a few, bombed a place in Palestine a few days ago, killed about 2, 3 kids. All Israelis are evil Jews. And that's the post.
That's not truthsy, right? I can consider that truthsy. Now imagine, for example, if the person's like, look, all literally the polls in Israel say 95% of the population considers that this attack was just, right? Then you know
Mhm.
what? At that point, and the key is not all Jews are evil, it's all Israeli
So let's say
Jews.
majority. Sorry.
Yeah,
Yes,
or
yes. Israeli.
majority. You know
So
what?
you're
I mean,
talking
I mean,
about
look, if like they bomb the hospital children, and there's a let's say a reliable poll that comes out that like 95% support
right,
it,
right.
then at that stage, I mean, it's a truth, right? Like
But
there's
you,
no.
but you,
I mean, it's kind of
but
like
you,
well, yeah,
When you start seeing how easy it is for that post to radicalize
yeah,
people.
yeah,
Like,
but
for example, it's
I
not.
wouldn't be opposed to that post. I wouldn't even be opposed to the radicalization caused from that post. It's kind of like seeing Afghanistan right now and the abysmal women rights thing, right? Like the
Mhm.
moment, like this the Taliban, right?
Iran?
Right?
Are
No,
you saying Iran
no, I'm
or?
talking about the
Oh, actually, kind of
Taliban.
both.
I'm talking, well, yeah, Iran too, but let's talk about just the Taliban, right? It's like you saying if someone makes a post, yo, the Taliban treat women like shit. I mean, they basically close the ministry for women's, they stop school, and they're gonna radicalize people. I'm like, you know what? Yeah, but radicalizing people is a bad thing if it's based on truth. Like, I would go ahead and say, you know what? Most people should say, yeah, fuck the Taliban government and their awful like records.
Well, see,
Like,
see, see, see. This is going to a really interesting question. I've been low key kind of trying to steer it that way because my ultimate question is, if a specific post could start an outright nuclear war, would you ban it?
again, it depends on the like I'm still a believer in free speech, right? And if that speech is true, the reason why I changed to responsible, because to me the main thing about responsible speech is, well, it's truthiness, like you said, right? And to me, if a speech is responsible, even if it will trigger a nuclear war, that's the price of free speech. So
That
yes,
means
I'll bite the bullet.
then
Yes.
then your clause of responsibility kind of falls apart. It's no longer if it causes harm, because the outright conclusion of this post would be that millions of people die. So obviously harm is not what we're trying to protect
You're
here.
right,
So
actually.
what is it?
It's truthiness. You're right, actually.
Truthiness is the pivotal point of what you consider responsible, not whether it causes harm or not, because there are
Mm.
certain truthy speeches that are absolutely going to cause harm.
Yes, and it's like you know the meme, and that's a sacrifice I'm willing to make. But but no, but like real talk, I mean, yeah, well, speech, right, and free speech has a price, right? And that's the
Yeah,
price of it. That speech will cause harm, right? And sometimes it's inevitable, and especially for change, right? It's kind of like saying, right, like we should ban posts that say, I don't know, like the top 1% hold the top 20 or 30% of wealth in the world, or like 50%. It's like, would that speech maybe radicalize people? Of course it will. But at the same
yeah.
time, it's not that radicalization itself is bad. It's radicalization based on misinformation, right?
I just want to expose my hidden agenda here, as I absolutely agree with you. I just wanted you to change your definition of, like, it's not harm that you're worried about, it's truthiness.
Well, congrats, you succeeded.
Yeah, I find it's more honest to the nuance of what a moderator is actually going to have to do and look for, and things that they should actually, well, in my opinion at least, should be looking at more than, like, whether it's going to cause harm to somebody, because fortunately or unfortunately, things you post on social media platforms that aren't moderated do have real world impacts. Shout out to the pharmaceutical companies who sell insulin. I'm looking at you.
Wine here tastes like piss. Anyway, what do you...
Okay, so basically, when it comes to censorship and responsible platforming, to make sure that the people on the platform are responsible is to make sure they're spreading the truth and not and it's not like it's necessarily a clear cut in anyways in this case, because knowing what's true, what's false, it's not as easy as just going and fact checking what the person is saying, like, and even there's still a lot of gray area for the moderator. But his job, based on what I'm understanding this is going, his job is not necessarily to find out whether this is causing harm or not. It's more whether this is based on truth, um, uh, or not. And if it is, then it's the moderator's job to not necessarily censor that. But if it's false or based on, like, misinformation, then that's when it can get banned or censored, rather.
Yeah.
So I guess the conclusion is say whatever you want as long as there's some statistics to
Yeah?
back up your
What do
opinion.
you want?
If it's grounded in truth.
Yeah, so make sure you do your research before going live, 20,000 people watching you, and start talking about stuff. Make sure you've done your due diligence and you fact checked uh, you fact check the resources of your resources, you know,
Oi, what
and
was
then
that?
at this point, even if ever the moderator decides to censor your content because the moderator determined that there's some sort of falsy information in what you're spreading, you should be happy that you were censored, because your goal or your intention should have never been to spread false information. However, obviously, then you get the biased situation here, where you know the moderator is biased in some way, then you know it could be tilted one way or another. But I mean that's beyond the conversation at this point.
Yeah, I think so too.
Mm.
Can I ask you guys a question that came to mind? And I'm remembering what my high school teacher said about this, and now I'm like low-key disagreeing with her and thinking what she explained is stupid. And it was, so let's say that you're saying what Learn just said, right? Like you're fact checking the facts. So you're fact checking the fact checkers, pretty much.
Yeah.
And at some point, I started thinking about what my school teacher said about not making calls to authority when you're making an argument. But I'm starting to wonder, and this is my question: is a call to authority necessarily referencing somebody who actually should have the expertise to make this argument, or at least to base my argument off of? Or is it a call to authority more have to do with the fact that I'm referencing an obscure figurehead that may or may not have
It's
authority?
usually at least the logical fallacy is the latter. Kinda like if I tell you Albert Einstein said communism is great, right? That would be if I don't think he said that, but if I said that would be like at least a logical
You heard
fallacy.
it. You heard it here first, folks. Albert Einstein was a communist.
Yes.
Absolutely.
So and the reason for why this is a fallacy is because Einstein was not known for his political science expertise, right? He was known for his physics expertise. So this is like a fallacious appeal to
Oh, okay.
authority.
Hmm.
So it's an appeal to authority of somebody who shouldn't have an authority, have any authority in the argument, in the
Yeah,
subject of the argument. You're thinking. Okay.
yeah.
Okay.
Like me appealing, let's say, to a random doctor versus me appealing to the head of like the CDC or the head of or the head of what's it called? The World Health Organization?
Who?
Yeah. Who are they?
Literally.
Yes.
Yeah, literally.
But yeah, like depending, like one of them is a much better appeal to authority.
Right. Okay. So it more has to do with arguments or information,
Yeah.
arguments or opinions based off of
Yeah.
some authorities.
Like for example, one big one was there was a creator, like one of the mRNA creators that was very heavily against it, right? And a lot of people were like citing that creator.
Wait,
The
they
game
were
is.
against mRNA vaccines?
Oh, one sec. Uh, is it fixed now?
Oh, I wasn't watching the game.
Yeah, I was asking Learn.
Yeah, it's good.
Okay.
Good now.
Perfect. Yeah. So, but the thing is, right? That guy had like worked on it like 30 years ago, and like Twitter, he had stopped like a long time ago, and people keep saying he's like the co-creator of it, but there are like thousands of scientists that worked on that thing, and the COVID vaccine released from the mRNA technology wasn't him. So, he is basically, I wouldn't call him fallacious, but he's as close as it gets to a fallacious appeal to authority.
5, 4,
I don't even know why we've gone on that tangent.
It was just a question. The reason is because you said something had to be truthy, but for you to verify a truth, you have to make some appeal to some authority who's
Yeah.
supposed to be an expert. Okay. Cool,
Well,
cool, cool.
at some point, I guess, just as a follow-up, at some point, let's say, for example, you have someone who's delivering content, and he's referring to those said authority, right? And they are within the right field to be able to be referred to. Why? And the one who's delivering the content, who's spreading the information, is referring to them, and he's transparent about his references. Why wouldn't the source of this information be liable for this falsely
Like the original source?
yeah, the original source, especially if there are consequences to this platformer, or not platformer, but the streamer, or let's say whoever is delivering this content on any platform.
Well, there will be consequences for everyone involved, right? But at the same time, if you're just repeating information without challenging it, that's also really on you, right?
I mean, if, let's say, for example, if uh, a million people believe in this source, right? Like, we're speaking as if it's easy for someone who's, like, delivering a stream 2-3 times a week to do a full research on the topic before start talking about it and formulate opinions about it, especially when we're talking about, like, when you're fact checking, or you're finding reliable sources. If some of the most, like, popular articles are telling you this is a reliable source, and then you say, okay, well, if this is a reliable source, this is what it's saying, then I conclude that this is what's going on, and then you start a stream about it, and then a moderator comes, and a moderator knows a little bit more about the subject for some reason, or he sees that you're gaining a lot of attention, and decides to find out more about the truth. Like, I still find that, some of the consequences of some of the control that this moderator has should really look into the intention of that reporter of this information, because if there is a reasonable amount of people that believed in the first place, believe that source in the first place.
Well, again, it always depends, right? Like, could you give, let's say, a concrete example? No, it doesn't have to be real. It can be hypothetical of, like, what you're trying to say.
Yeah,
Oh, I have an example.
Okay, go for it.
Wait, I may have an example, and it's a tweet that happened. Oh, this is nice. Maybe I could just read live tweets as they're happening.
Yeah.
So, a tweet that happened a couple days ago, or a couple minutes ago, at 2:40. Kevin Sorbo. The media hates Kanye and Elon Musk more than they ever hated Epstein or Harvey Weinstein.
Yeah.
Is that an example of an opinion that could be based on facts, that is clearly inferring anti-Semitic views?
I mean, probably, but it's not something I would ban personally.
Why? Because it's truthy?
I mean, I don't even think it's that juicy. But at the end of the day, like, how can I say this? At the end of the day, it's opinionated enough that actually, yeah, it is because it's juicy. Like, there is enough wiggle room that you can't say, like, it's completely false. But I would say it's, like, marginally false.
I don't know about that, because it's the type of opinion that's not necessarily based on a hard statistic. You can't verify that it's
Exactly. Well,
true or not, right?
that's kind of why I'll keep it.
So you keep it not because it's truthy, because you can't prove that it's not truthy.
Exactly. Then the burden comes on, well, people like me, I would argue, who have a platform to talk against this stuff.
Okay, so now we have two conditions. One has to be truthy if it's making a claim based on some verifiable figure or
Well,
stat.
yeah,
And
well, stat, not figure, but yeah.
stat, well, when I say figure, I mean like, reference, like
Yeah,
a figure
like
at 1.1
stats
kind of thing.
or, yeah, you got it.
Yeah. Or has to be an opinion that you can't verify if it's truthy or not.
Yeah.
Interesting. So
Well,
would you then, what if it transitions?
what do you mean?
Sorry, I feel like I'm just fucking with Teach here.
Go ahead. I mean,
What if it transitions? There's no statistics for this not verifiable truthy claim now or opinion now, but in about 2 months, somebody with a lot of time on their hands is gonna go about collecting statistics for this and prove it wrong.
well, then they
What would
proved
you
it.
do?
I mean, by that point, yeah, well, like the media, right? You gotta retract shit.
Who's retracting what though? Are you retracting it? Because the poster isn't retracting it.
Yeah. Wait, could you repeat the question, please?
Who's retracting? Because the original poster's not retracting it.
Well, yeah, then you could ban it. You could. I mean, realistically, it doesn't matter because that thing is already old, right? You know, with the attention span of our online generation, after like 2 days, your tweet doesn't matter anymore. That's like the honest, practical answer. But it is kind of a cop out.
It is a cop out because a year later, some weirdo on Twitter is gonna be like, "Hey, you remember that thing that was said about these people? But then, Twitter didn't ban this. They must have a hidden agenda. They're also on their side."
Yeah. I'll have to think about it. I think, yeah, you know what? If it becomes a problem, I say no. At that stage, you keep it for posterity because it's a lose-lose. A lose a pragmatic answer because you remove it and they're like, oh look, now that the tooth is coming out, they're retroactively changing it. But my
Yeah.
entire team is dead. What?
Oh, man. Uh, uh, subjects. Do you guys have sponsors? Can we take a commercial break? They brought to you in part by Sprite, something.
We don't.
Okay.
Do you want to take a break though?
Well, I'm about to go cook dinner, so it's more like a permanent break until next time I'm invited to the
Ah,
podcast.
well, that's fine. Well, I guess we want to thank G for joining us.
Yeah, of course, and it was you had really interesting questions, and I think that we've narrowed down like a few key points about. Well, I think we've kind of like covered the subject. We could possibly wrap it up here, and then come up with a new subject for next podcast. But do you guys have any like final words about the censorship and responsible platforming in an extremely polarized world that you want to
Yeah.
add?
Well, I mean, it's funny because I originally was gonna take this conversation more towards how we can be responsible when we platform people we disagree with, but it kind of ended up being how can Twitter be responsible, which is definitely still an interesting conversation, but definitely not one I planned for, the one I was expecting. But it's still an interesting conversation.
And King D.
I would say always be trolling, and even if you weren't trolling, say you were trolling. Cop out. Always cop out.
And my final word would probably be like with this conversation, because as much as you can have very good intentions, you never know when you make a mistake and your entire online presence